Rigel Keckmacher stood on the platform next to his ship as he waited for his other crewmate to arrive. It wasn't his ship, really, as recorders like him would go from ship to ship, from one mission to the next. The ships didn't even have a name, just a random set of numbers only some egghead somewhere knew the meaning of. The actual name of the ship would be determined by the mission that they went on. Rigel looked the egg-shaped ship over a bit and then turned to look down the gangplank as he heard footsteps approaching. It was his crewmate arriving with their orders. The crewmate's name was Gesso Nazarly, a relative newbie to the organization, although he looked to be in his mid-30s. Rigel himself was just past 50 and was the opposite of his crewmate in every way. Gesso was tall, lanky, seemed to have a permanent tan, and wore his brown wavy hair a bit long and sported a goatee. Rigel was former military, and as such his dark hair was short and going a bit gray, and his face was clean-shaven. Rigel wasn't very tall as compared to Gesso, and had put on a bit of weight over the past few years. Still, he was in good enough health to withstand the rigors of his job. Gesso calmly waved as he approached Rigel. "I have the envelope with the orders," he said as he held it up for Rigel to see. "Seems a bit thick." Rigel looked at it, and it did seem thicker than the usual order envelope. Gesso passed it over, and Rigel studied the weight of it. Beyond the papers that were inside that would give them their instructions, there was obviously a book in there with them. "Oh, and it seems we have a VIP coming with us," Gesso added. "What?" Rigel asked, looking up at Gesso and forgetting about the package in his hands. "Who?" "I don't really know," Gesso replied. "Politician of some sort, I think. Some guy named Nelson Henderson. I saw Director Bowler talking to him." "That's just great," Rigel said sardonically. "These ships are cramped enough with just 2 people in them, much less a third." "Here they come," Gesso warned as he looked down the gangplank he just walked up. Director Sigurd Bowler was a stout man, just much like Rigel, with paler blonde hair. Nelson Henderson was like Gesso, but beefier, like he had played in some professional sport in his past, and had straight, light brown hair. Both men were clean-shaven and dressed in professional business suits. Nelson was carrying a garment bag over his shoulder with one hand and a briefcase in the other. "Gentlemen," Director Bowler said as he approached Rigel and Gesso, "I see you have your orders." "Yes, sir," Rigel replied. "This is Senator Nelson Henderson. He'll be riding with you on your mission." The men all nodded at each other. Director Bowler gestured at Rigel and Gesso. "These are your crewmates, Senator. Rigel Keckmacher, Senior Recorder, and our rookie, Gesso Nazarly, Associate Recorder." "I'd shake hands, but they're a bit full," Nelson said sheepishly. "Not a problem, Senator," Gesso said. "Let me help you with your burden." Gesso reached out and took the garment bag from Nelson. "I'll put this inside." He turned and walked over to the hatch. It hissed as it pulled it open, and then crawled inside the ship. "Well, gentlemen," Bowler said, "I'll leave you in their capable hands, Senator. Good hunting, Rigel." Bowler gave Rigel a quick salute, and then turned to walk down the gangplank. Rigel entered the ship, followed by Nelson. The hatch opened into the cramped living quarters inside. There was a closet, a restroom, a computer console with an inbuilt chair, and 2 bunk beds. Between the bunks and the lavatory was a ladder that went up to the control room via another hatch. Gesso had draped the garment bag over the lower bunk and had climbed the ladder through the hatch. Rigel began climbing the ladder as Nelson put the briefcase down. He climbed up the ladder as soon as Rigel had cleared the hatch. Gesso was already in a chair, a clipboard in his lap, and began to flip switches. Rigel climbed into the chair next to him. The cockpit that they sat in was less a cockpit than something that resembled a media control center. It was mostly circular in shape. There were video screens all along 2/3 of the cockpit's walls. The main control console was in the center of them. A secondary console and table were in the center of the room. Next to that was the hatch and ladder that went down to the cramped living area below. Computer banks, control systems for the various drives, and other monitoring systems lined the back third of the wall. They each had a chair on rollers to move about the room, as the space was almost too small to stand upright. "You're in luck, Senator," Rigel said over his shoulder. Someone knew you were coming and got you another chair. Normally there's only 2 in here. Nelson sat down in the extra chair and watched as Gesso and then Rigel went over the checklist. Gesso sat in his chair nervously watching the senior recorder as he went over the checklist. It was Gesso's job to make sure that everything was in order and checked off, but it was Rigel's job to ensure that Gesso had done it right. Rigel flipped a few switches back and forth before putting the checklist back in the console table in front of him. "Everything checks out," Rigel said with a grin that set Gesso and Nelson at ease. "Let's close the hatch." Gesso rolled the chair over to the floor hatch, got out, climbed down the ladder, and closed the hatch. A few seconds later, he was back up the ladder and was closing the floor hatch. "Everything pressurized," Rigel said as he flipped another switch. Gesso was back in his chair and back at the controls. What few display screens were already on were joined by all the rest. Nelson marveled at all the different views that were around the ship. Everything was cramped in the egg-shaped ship, for a reason. It was just big enough to hold the 2 pilots, made a bit more cramped with the addition of the 3rd passenger, hundreds of tiny cameras and microphones, the anti-gravity drives, the space warp drives, and time warp drives, and the cloaking device. Rigel picked up the mission envelope and opened the seal on it. "Let's see what they want us to do today," he said. An ancient book fell into Rigel's hands, pages of which had been flagged with markers. He handed the text to Gesso and read the mission guide. "According to sections of the book of Luke and the book of Matthew, a Joseph of Nazareth and his wife Mary traveled to the town of Bethlehem and gave birth to a son named Jesus. An astronomical event, in the form of a bright star over the town, signaled the event and directed 3 wise men sent by the current monarch, King Herod. Record both the events. And here's the timestamp information and the coordinates." Rigel handed the information chip over to Gesso. "Log those in, please." "Right." Gesso plugged in the chip and began downloading the information into the ship's computers. "Sounds like an important job," Nelson said. "One of the more important jobs, according to this," Rigel commented as he read further. "If it's that important, why haven't they recorded it sooner?" Rigel read some more. "Apparently they had some trouble nailing this one down. There's no exact date given for the event, so they had to do sweeps in order to find it." "Can't they figure it out by that star they're talking about?" Gesso asked, punching in the last of the codes. "That seems to be part of the problem," Rigel answered. "No such event matches the time period when this supposedly happened. So they want us to find out if it happened as it says it did in these texts." Gesso thought for a moment as the ship's engines revved up. "So we're just part of another sweep then, right?" "Yes and no," Rigel replied. "According to this, the last mission missed the event by at least a week. They spotted the family as they were leaving town, so they recorded what they could and then came back. Why didn't they just jump ahead to an earlier time?" Nelson asked. Rigel looked at Nelson and put the log in his lap. "Because, Senator, we can only jump twice. Once there and once back. That's the best we can do with what we have. Time is a very stable thing, and once warped it wants to go back, and no one has figured out how to make more than one jump in a single warp." Rigel went back to the log. "We'll be jumping 2 weeks before the last survey mission," he continued. He pressed a button and pulled up the calendar. "Late March, it seems." He looked at Gesso. "Coordinate set?" "Set," Gesso answered. "Wait," Nelson said. "How long are we going to be gone?" "In this timeline, Senator, only a minute or 2, Rigel answered. "But on this ship, while we're there, could be a week or 2. "I wasn't prepared for a 2-week trip," Nelson muttered just loud enough for them to hear. "Well, Senator, neither is this ship," Rigel replied. "We've got just 2 weeks of supplies on board, and then we have to come back, whether we complete the mission or not. Hopefully it won't take that long." Rigel turned to Gesso. "Okay, signal the ship that we're ready to leave." Gesso punched a few buttons. "Signal sent and acknowledged," Gesso stated. "Plank retracted. Docking clamps released." "Here we go," Rigel said. The ship gave a lurch as it pulled away from the docking clamps and floated out of the bay. A hatch over the docking bay rolled back to reveal blue skies overhead. The view screens inside displayed the ocean below them and the hills in the distance. The transport carrier rocked on the ocean's waves. They climbed higher into the sky and watched as the sun was beginning to set in the horizon. The ship then began to glow as the 2 warp drives began to kick in. The space warp drive would bend light, and the time warp drive would bend time. Mission log 30, Gesso said as he looked over the instructions. Took them 29 tries to get this one event. Hopefully 30 will be our lucky number, Rigel replied. He keyed in the microphone. Transport 2, this is Starfinder 30. Ready for departure. Copy, Starfinder. Engage cloaking device now. Roger, Gesso said as he flipped the switch. The ambient light cast from the glowing ship disappeared from the water as the cloak engaged. Cloak affirmative. Proceed with warp. Good hunting. Roger, transport, Rigel answered. Warp in 3, 2, 1. The screens all went blank as the 2 drives activated.